Good Saturday morning from the National Weather Service in Raleigh. My name is James Marr. I'm a meteorologist here at the National Weather Service with your decision support briefing number 2. This information is a rebroadcast of what was broadcast originally at 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, September 8th, talking about Tropical Storm Florence. The latest information that we have, there hasn't been too much of a change. However, confidence continues to increase that impacts of some sort will be felt across the southeastern U.S. from a potentially strong hurricane once Tropical Storm Florence actually begins to pick up in intensity in the next 48 to 72 hours and pick up in speed as it approaches the southeastern U.S. coast later next week. Taking a look at what Florence looks like this morning. So Florence right there is in the central Atlantic. It is looking a lot better structurally compared to what it was looking like about 24 hours ago. So things are starting to look more favorable for continued development and strengthening beginning now and continuing over the next 3, 4, and 5 days as it makes its final approach into the southeastern United States coastline. Here's the latest from the National Hurricane Center as of 11 a.m. Saturday, September 8th. Max sustained winds are 65 miles per hour. The storm is still located north to northeast of the Leeward Islands. It is moving west at a slow 7 miles per hour, and its pressure is dropped slightly to 995 millibars or 29.39 inches. We're expecting this slow movement to continue for the next 12 to 24 hours before a bit of a faster pace and a strengthening trend picks up as it begins to interact with some much warmer waters here south of Bermuda as it makes its approach to the southeastern United States. Anywhere from next Wednesday to next Friday would be potential impact times here in the southeastern U.S. coastline. So some key messages from the National Hurricane Center. Florence is forecast to be a dangerous and major hurricane as it nears the southeast U.S. coast later next week, and the risk of direct impacts in our area continues to increase with each model run. But there is still quite a bit of uncertainty, especially when it comes to the track and the storm's intensity along that track. In these extended time ranges, anywhere from 4 to 7 days. So right now it's too soon to determine the exact timing, location, and magnitude of specific impacts. That being said, any interest along the U.S. eastern coastline, including us right here in central North Carolina, should continue to closely monitor the progress of Tropical Storm Florence and ensure they have their hurricane plan in place and follow any advice given by local officials. Large swells could begin impacting the eastern barrier islands of the southeastern coast as early as Sunday evening and continue much of next week as this storm does approach. Here's a look at the tropical storm force wind speed probabilities. And right now, portions of southern North Carolina are seeing anywhere from 20 to 30% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. Keep in mind, this isn't a 20% chance of rain. These are a 20 to 30% chance of tropical storm force winds. So this is not something you should ignore. And as confidence increases and as the storm approaches the southeastern coastline, don't be surprised to see some of these higher percentiles inch into portions of North Carolina. And we could easily see upwards of 40, 50, even likelihood of tropical storm force winds across much of North Carolina as this thing begins to come ashore later next week. Here's the earliest reasonable arrival time of these winds, and we could see these winds approaching anywhere from Wednesday afternoon into Wednesday evening time frame next week. So right now we are still in the preparation phase, but we will be quickly turning into the taking action stage of this system as early as Sunday and Monday. To support that, we're actually going to begin twice daily webinars beginning tomorrow, Sunday, the 9th of September, and lasting until the end of this event. And those will be at 11:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Each day until they are no longer needed as the event pushes or comes to an end. So here's a quick overview of the tropical weather outlook, of the 2-day tropical weather outlook. We have two named systems, Florence, the one we're highly keeping an eye on, and then two more, Tropical Depression 9 and Tropical Storm Helene, which is off the western coast of Africa. Both of these systems look to remain more of a southern track and could impact portions of the Caribbean in the next week or so. While Florence does look like it's heading more toward the southeastern coast, as we saw the cone on the last graphic there. And we have a disturbance that's about 10% chance of development, not a very high chance, and that should remain out at sea as it's being rotated around the same blocking high that's likely going to keep Florence south and along the track that we're currently seeing. Some earlier tracks that you may have seen had it kind of going north and staying out to sea. Well, that blocking high, the same one responsible for kind of keeping this disturbance from forming and organizing, will be responsible for keeping Florence along that southern track that we previously saw in the graphic. So here's what we continuously are advising. It is too early to predict exactly where Florence will move beyond early next week. It is becoming increasingly more likely we will see some sort of impacts, but being able to nail down those specific impacts will be it will be very tough until we're about 4 to 5 days out of the event. So we're still roughly 1 to 2 days from being certain or more certain on what impacts we should be prepared for. However, it is never too early to make those preparations. So be sure you have a hurricane kit. Be sure to have your emergency plans and food supplies, water supplies, power supplies all up to date, and be ready to implement those plans as soon as possible. So those final preparations should be completed no later than this evening into even early portions of Sunday. And also be cautious about some of the information you see on social media. Be sure they're coming from valid sources. There's a lot of fake information out there. Or misinterpreted information out there. So be sure to follow us here at the National Weather Service, your local trusted meteorologist, and of course the experts down at the National Hurricane Center. So I'm going to go ahead and present a couple of scenario tracks. These are not forecast tracks by any means, but these are potential track scenarios and what impacts we could potentially see if a track of similar nature were to occur. And this is based on climatological events, past storms, that we've seen across portions of North Carolina. And I've also highlighted whether or not the risk levels, what the risk levels are. So for instance, the gray box here is a low risk, all the way up to a purple shaded box of high risk for the main impacts we can see from tropical systems. That includes surge along the coastline, wind, tornadoes, and of course the risk of heavy rainfall that could lead to flooding. So let's start first with the lowest impact type track, and that's one that just skims the Outer Banks. Of course, the surge is going to be a concern, especially for those along Cape Hatteras and the Outer Banks and the Barrier Islands here. You could see some overwash. You could certainly see some high swells. But however, at least for the mainland North Carolina, wind, tornado, and flooding threat remain rather low threats in a similar track to this magnitude. Now, however, if the storm does come on land anywhere from the south to southeastern portions of North Carolina, we could definitely see a much higher risk of surge, especially anywhere from Wilmington to Morehead City along the eastern coastline. That surge will certainly be high impactful, and we also have high impacts from wind, especially where the eye comes ashore, and it can extend hundreds of miles both east and west of where the storm center currently is. We'll also have a tornado threat that comes along with tropical systems, and that threat primarily is to the north and the east of the eventual track. Tornadoes typically are short-lived and low intensity. However, tropical systems are usually pretty good producers of a tornado-prone environment, so that'll be something we'll be monitoring closely, especially if parts of our area find themselves north and east of the eventual track of the system. And typically rainfall, the heaviest rain follows along, and in this case, with not much upper-level support or interaction, we'll actually see along and east of the track we'll likely see the greatest amount of rainfall. And that is also where your best flooding threat, both at a flash flooding type threat with the heaviest rain bands, but also eventually a river type flooding event several days that could last several days to even weeks after the event comes to a close. One of our worst case scenarios would be a track that goes just south of the area and just west of the area. So if, in this case, most of central North Carolina would end up being in the most highly impacted areas. For instance, surge would be an issue across much of the eastern coastline. Wind would be a factor, especially right where the storm comes along shore and in the eventual track. But remember, those tropical storm to hurricane force winds can extend hundreds of miles both east and west of the center of the storm. Tornado impacts would be possible across all of states, especially with some of the heaviest rain bands and storm bands coming ashore. And of course, flooding would be a key factor, especially east of track and along the track of the eventual system. So lots of uncertainty in play. Hopefully this did a good job showcasing how just a slight change in track can really change some of these impacts. And that is why we're not very prone to trying to predict specific impacts with tropical systems as we are this far out from the event actually occurring. So just a reminder, inland offices, including us, will be issuing tropical products beginning this year. So don't be alarmed if you have a tropical storm warning or a hurricane warning, even though you were inland and away from the coast. These will be used in place of the wind advisories and the high wind warnings that we once were issuing with tropical systems. But if the conditions warrant it, if you're going to have tropical storm type conditions or hurricane type conditions, we'll actually be able to issue tropical storm warnings and hurricane warnings and watches as needed. We also have a new tropical webpage that you're able to use, and this tropical webpage is very resourceful, has all the latest National Hurricane Center information with each update that comes out, and it has an active storms tab that allow you to not only follow Florence, but you can actually follow any other tropical systems that may be out there at this time. This includes threat and impacts once we start issuing some of our local products, and satellite, latest radar, and some preparedness materials if you need help getting ready for a potential system across central North Carolina. So that is the end of this briefing. Our next briefing will be at this time, 11:30 a.m. on Sunday, the 9th of September, with a follow-up briefing at 5:30 p.m. Sunday to follow up. So if you need more information, be sure to visit us at weather.gov/Raleigh, and of course follow our Facebook and Twitter pages for the latest information. Thank you and have a good day.